Our first speaker is Dr. Noelle Kumpel from Zoological Society of London, and she's going to speak to us about a global survey on what people think of how much we need to protect nature. Noelle.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm presenting today some of the results from a survey that we've done on public opinions on space for nature. The background to the survey is that we know about the Convention on Biological Diversity's Aichi Target 11's aims, which are to protect 17% of the world's terrestrial and inland water areas and 10% of its coastal and marine areas by 2020. This target has largely been agreed through a political process and has had relatively little consultation with the public on what areas we should protect for nature and why. So what space we want to see and why. So a key aspect of this survey has been to ask people around the world for the first time their opinion regarding the space we set aside for nature. So we developed a short online questionnaire targeting a randomised national level cross-section of society of 7 developed and developing countries: Australia, the UK, the USA, Brazil, China, India and South Africa. So it's hardly not exactly a comprehensive coverage of the globe, but it did cover all inhabited continents. We completed about over 7,000 questionnaires, around 1,000 from each country. And the country samples, we tested them and they were representative of things like age and gender. We collected further responses in a follow-up open global online call disseminated by ZSL and many partners on our behalf. But I'm not going to be presenting the results of that here. So the first question we asked was whether people thought protected areas were necessary. And we asked them on a scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. And the resounding answer was yes, 97% of people felt that protected areas were necessary. Then we asked them how much they thought should be protected before telling them anything about the targets. And the median percentage of both the land and the sea that people thought should be protected across the planet was 50%, and that's with no prompting. And you can see that's vastly above the targets that are shaded. The current percentage is shaded grey, and the targets are just above that. So you can see, particularly for the ocean, there's a big gap there. And that was across the countries we surveyed, that was relatively consistent, between 40% for countries like the UK, India and China, and 70% for Brazil. And that was very similar for the oceans as well, but actually slightly higher for many countries. People thinking that more ocean should be protected than land. And then we actually asked people whether what percentage of their own country and the planet should be protected for land and the ocean. And we found a bit of a not in my backyard response, in that people tended to think that more of the planet should be protected than the equivalent in their own country. And that was the same. I'm showing this is the land comparison. It's only, as you can see, it's only South Africa that thinks the same for the planet in their own country, and it's the same pattern for the oceans as well. So at an individual level, females, younger people and those working outdoors for more than 20 hours a week wanted to see more area protected. We also asked people about their interest in or knowledge of conservation or protected areas, and that had no effect, so it didn't make a difference whether they were pro-conservation or not. And so to sum up, people want slightly more ocean protected than land. People want more of the planet protected than their own country. And we also asked them about what percentage of the world did they think was currently protected, and they overestimated that considerably. Both for land and sea, people thought that 30% of the planet was already protected. So then we asked them, we told them what the percentage for land and sea that was, what the current targets were, and then we asked them what they thought barriers might be to increasing that target. And the main barriers that people perceived were things like funding and support from a government, it being a low government priority, and public support and understanding of the value of protected areas. And significantly less important were competition for space and cost of protected areas. So then we asked people why they thought protected areas were necessary. We did also give them the option to say they didn't think they were necessary, but I haven't included, and that was a very low proportion of responses, so that's not included here. And the top response was people felt that protected areas were necessary for conserving wildlife and habitats. Second was keeping the planet functioning. Third was connecting to nature. And fourth, supporting local livelihoods. And last was economic benefits. And keep those different values in your mind, because we'll be looking at those in more depth later on in the session. So we asked a similar question, but in a bit more detail, and asking why protected areas were important to people personally. So there's a lot of information on this graph, but basically each of these lines is essentially more detailed responses falling into those same categories that I mentioned on the previous slide, so conserving wildlife and habitats, keeping planet functioning, etc. So what's worth noting from this is that for the developed countries, in South Africa, all the countries, again, said protecting wildlife and protecting natural beauty, which are the first two, or natural habitats, they're the first two on columns on the slide. And the developed countries thought those were particularly important reasons compared to the developing countries, which had a sort of broader spread of reasons and rated supporting local livelihood type reasons a bit higher. So there's a sort of difference between those two sets of countries slightly. But resoundingly, the conservation ones came out on top for every country. And then we asked the same question, but why people thought protected areas might be important to their government. And you can see, again, as a sort of split between the developed and the developing countries here, with the developed countries thinking that the government's rated protected areas, all those reasons, a bit lower, and the developing countries are a little bit thinking a bit more of their government, basically. And you can see that they didn't rate the conservation aspects as much, and understandably the economic and the keeping planet functioning kind of aspects were seen as more important reasons. So then we asked people how often they visited protected areas, and Brazil and India came out as significantly higher. Now, if you remember, Brazil also was the country that wanted to see the most land and sea protected at 70%. And we asked them how often we visited, at least that question was split up into how often they visited different types of protected areas. And so thinking about Brazil and India here, both of those countries significantly visited urban parts more than others, and Brazil had a very high visitation rate of national parks as well. But Brazil particularly Brazilians tended to visit protected areas more than other countries. And then we asked about barriers to visiting protected areas. And those were these grouped into sort of types of reasons. Access issues are the biggest barrier, then lack of awareness, and then cost and resource restrictions. So in summary, people want to see 50% of both the land and the ocean protected, and that's currently considerably more than the current targets of 17 and 10%. People assume that much more is already protected than actually is, so people guessed that around 30% of both the land and the ocean was protected. And people think that protected areas are most important for the conservation of wildlife and habitats, although there are subtle differences and the weighting of that is slightly different between the developing and the developed countries. And use of protected areas may create more positive attitudes towards them, although other country factors may be important. And obviously with our small sample size, we're unable to disentangle some of those other effects that might be specific to countries. So we'd really like to extend this survey to cover more countries and a broader section of the community beyond an online survey, which would help. I think we've already got some interesting results which are quite useful, but that would be even more helpful to inform national policy and help us understand these global patterns as well. So thank you to a number of people who have helped me with the survey, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session. Thank you.